slides to move. There we go. So food itself, let's just talk a little bit about that. So as I said earlier on, we're talking about information today, but it's a really complex challenge. It's got huge parts. We've been discussing access to land and the food production itself. So one of the key things that I found, and I'm sure you'll find as well, is whilst we're looking at the potential for feeding ourselves, and I mean, that's complex in itself, Brexit, COVID, and it's certainly shown us that what we can do and what we should be doing. And obviously some of the issues that affect us economically, some of the imports, I mean, we're roughly at the moment around about, statistics change, but about 80% of our food is imported. Different ways that you want to affect change. So I'm not going to talk about all of them, just simply going to lay it there and saying it's complex. There are different parts. And one of the things that we need to weigh that against is affordability and profitability. If we're talking access to nutritional food, if we're talking education, if we're talking access to land, you know, all of that comes at a cost, whether that's sustainability cost, you know, regeneration of land is very much or regeneration of farming is very much in the news at the moment. And there are organisations who are dealing with these. Your organisation, your want and your vision may be different to mine, but I think what we're trying to get to here is how do we balance all of these visions? How do we work together? How do we link that to affordability and profitability? Because we have to look at the economy as well, but not to the detriment of the planet. So sustainability is the key. So we're going to look at supply and demand. And Simon, who is the expert in this, is going to come in shortly and talk a little bit about what we've done in one particular project that I want to speak about is how we share information. And one of the key things with all of that complexity is, where is the information? Do we share that information? Because I don't know about you guys, but I'm sure that you'll validate what I'm about to say, is that there is so much information out there. So many people who are actually mapping land. A Welsh Government, for example, I know they're in the room as well, not quite sure which department, but we've mapped Wales. We know what our soil looks like, our environment looks like, what we can grow, what we should be growing. But there is no one place to put that information. They come from different departments, agriculture, Brexit control, economy, etc. And that access to nutritious food, where it becomes circular. So if we've got access to land issues, we know where the land is. We know that there are various people mapping it, but how on earth do we get hold of that information? There are also other organisations, your own organisations might be one of these that I'm about to mention, that are looking at some of the issues here. Cardiff Capital Region, I've mentioned Monmouthshire County Council. I am a past member of the authority there. So some of the key issues that we looked at there was, should we be sharing information? Should we be having a receptacle, a place, a position where we can all add our information, use that information, without the complexities of data protection, for example, where we could get the information on what we produce, where we produce it, who are we selling to, where are we buying, what is the nutritional value of that food, and what should we be growing in the future. So that's what Simon's going to touch on in a minute, and his skills base is far better than mine in the complexities of the technical issues. But all of that leads to the lack of the confidence that we have in the ability to feed ourselves. Those issues of understanding where the information is, being able to access that information, has to change. And I think, Simon, I'm going to bring you in at this point. I think all of those things are the stepping stones that we need to bring together, to cross the streams, if you want to call it that, to use a bit of an analogy, or the farmland, to get to that confidence in feeding ourselves. So one of the projects that we looked at previously with Welsh Government funding, foundational economy funding, was should we be able to share information? And how do we develop those partnerships to ensure that we could get the right information and access to everybody? And I have to say at this point, with thanks to Ordnance Survey, for example, Gloucester University, CCRI rather, not Gloucester University, Welsh Government and various other organisations, we managed to gather and gain information which we put in one place. So Simon's going to talk a little bit about how that affects, what that looks like, and how that affects the demand and supply and etc. So I'm going to hand over to you, Simon, I think at that point, and I will come back in later on just to sort of summarise and offer another example once Simon's finished. Simon.
So I'll share my screen then, and can you confirm if you can see this for me?
Yeah, we've got it, Simon.
So you should have a pretty coloured screen there. Yeah, so apologies. My name is Simon Griffiths, and I am a supply chain specialist. And that I have contracts and have worked with Welsh Government, UK Government, agencies, and I'm also the commercial advisor to the Foundation Economy Alliance, who advises government on how to get the foundation economy right. Now, a quick spiel on the foundation economy, you may have heard of it, but the simplest way to explain that is it has two sides. On the customer side, or the citizen side, the foundation economy, the citizen will need to rely on everything and the needs they need to keep them safe, well, and to prosper. So housing, food, all the pipes that go into the houses, work, education, and the tertiary services such as the NHS, etc. Now, on the supply side of the foundation economy, it's all of those supply chains that go into that. And our job as supply chain specialists is to try and make sure that to make our supply chains more resilient, so that we can of our citizens across Wales. Now, when you look at food, give you some example. We talked about private and public sector where I contract. The food spend in the public sector is about 130 million, and that includes some catering contracts that are within that spend, and we know that because we've analysed it. In the private sector, it's about 2,000 million, so about 2 billion market value. So there's a lot more complexity and data in the private sector. But what you usually find is that if the public sector makes a mark to try and get resilience on the supply side within the food chain, the private sector follows. And then you get multiple demand and it starts to snowball into effect where we get into a better position. So on the screen you see in front of you here, on the left-hand side, you see the main bullet points which have been taken out of most policies which are communicated by Welsh and UK government. We need resilience. That isn't at the forefront of the policies, but in our opinion as supply chain specialists, if you get resilience in your supply chain by bringing your supply chain closer to home, growing your own, etc., then you do get a reduction in emissions, so that's better for the environment. You get more opportunity for the circular economy because you can collect and recycle your products and use them in anaerobic digesters, etc. You get better economics because the farms are growing more and they're getting more money for their produce, and employment goes up as well. So for me, in most of the projects that we do, resilience is key. But when we're talking to most audiences, we focus on environment, economy, and employment economics, which, you know, makes the world go around and for companies to prosper. On the right-hand side, you see some perhaps opportunities that need to be considered when looking at supply chains and building resilience in the supply chains. You need to look at the current contracts, because what usually happens, a buyer goes out to market, they usually appoint, and I'll show you this later on, a distributor of goods, and then a distributor of goods procures the produce that is needed in our schools and our hospitals and our catering departments. And from the data that we've analysed, it is known that 80% of that produce is from outside of Wales. And I'm going to show you later on through the data sets of how we've looked at what can be grown in Wales and how we can get them into the contracts. So the next bullet there is what data exists and how we can make those changes then and combine the multiple sources of data sets and take more control of the supply chain and drive more resilience so that we can be in a better position when we're looking at growing locally, putting a good case to get access to more land, etc., and have more nutritional products with less food miles. And in all of that, the orange button right at the bottom there is something we all think about, is you know, let's not buy now and pay later. Let's think about our future generations as a consequence of our decision making today. And if you've got that as a principle, then you're not going to go far wrong with your acquisition of produce. So to do all this, we need some data, and I'm going to go a little bit geeky, I'm afraid, but I'm going to simplify it for you. Let's look at data in a very small context. If you're going to make something, you need some decisions before you can do it. So if I want to cook a cake, if I want to make a meal, I got to have a recipe. So I need to know the ingredients. And if you know the ingredients, we need to know how much of each ingredient you need. And you need to know if you have the budget to procure those ingredients. And if you do, will you then get the quality of the ingredients you need and the right amount delivered at the right time in order to make that meal in time for the person that's going to receive it. Now multiply that by 1 million meals a year, which could be the volume of the free school meals program going forward, which we worked on previously, and you can understand the complexity of getting all of those supply chains right. And that's some of the stuff that we do. So data, if you look at data, it comes in many forms. And on the left of the screen, you'll see the forms that are inputted. You can use systems to smarten it up. And when you smarten it up in the middle, you start to be able to make some decisions on what's available, what is not available, and is what is not available a critical item? And if it is, then what are we going to do about that? And then you can make decisions once you've tidied your data up. And there's a lot of input and thought that goes through all of that. From the start, you've got to gather it. Multi-source, Deserie said, and I'll show you some of the data sets later on. When we looked at the project for Gwent to make it more resilient, to understand what the supply looks like, we had multi-sources of data from rural Wales. We had all the land and the soil information. We had all of the supply information from the farmers on cheese, on apples, and I got some potatoes and some examples of that data for you. Then you analyze that data. So you categorize it, code it, group it, structure it, interpret it, and then provide nice pictures and graphs and information for those decisions to make change, to make the supply chain a bit more resilient. Now, change is a big word there. I know it's a cliche change, but we are experts in change, and use a little lesson in change. And you can see in the red on those arrows that data runs right through change. So to make change happen, you've got to create a level of dissatisfaction with the status quo. So we're not resilient in our supply chains, okay? But we could be, so you shouldn't be happy about that. But what you do then is communicate the benefits of change, the resilience, the environment, the circular economy, the economics, the employment. And once you've got people in that position, then you've got to calculate whether the value of investment within those decisions to be made far outweigh the disbenefits and the cost of doing so. And then you have a business case to move supply chains closer to home. And I'll argue with anybody in any procurement profession that you cannot, there's nothing in the current regulations, and there's lots of them, that will deter you from localizing your supply chains. It's just the way you specify it. There are different types of mechanisms for change. A pull intervention is using the buyer to develop their specifications as such that those critical resilience, environment, economy and employment factors are written right through your spec. That's a pull. So you pull in that information from the market. Then if you still come across a void, it may need a push. A push intervention is a government funded project. So for instance, we may need more land. Then we go and search for grants and support to access that land and the plant and machinery to grow, and the impact and the outcomes of that decision will far outweigh the cost. That's what we're talking about when we try to localise the demand. So for local produce, there's a couple of simple questions and factors to consider. You know, do you have constant demand for a particular product? 130 million in the public sector, is the answer to that is yes. Do you have a supply network for these produce and products? The answer to that is yes as well. And I'm going to show you some of the data on that. Do you have a desire to localise and recycle your produce? But every single policy, including the Foundation Economy and the Wellbeing of Future Generation Act, says we should. So yes is the answer to that. Then, do you have the data to give you the head start? And people say no, but Des and I will always say, yes, we do. And Des is nodding with that. And the last factor is, do you have the resources to make it happen? And often, unfortunately, they don't, because within the public sector, experts like Des leave, and then who else do experts go and ask to try and produce something like a local resilient supply chain for food? So it is questionable whether resources exist, but help is available. Now, this is one of the data sets, and what you're looking at here is a direct extract from the data set that Des commissioned within Welsh Government that I worked in to look at resilience in food across Wales data, but the demand information that you'll see in a minute is just for Gwent. So this is potatoes, and you can see the 2,432 hectares of potatoes are grown in Wales. So that information should be, the map should be looked in conjunction with the text on the right-hand side of your screens. Then we look at the demand. So on the left-hand side, which you can now see circled with the sketched box, that there was 308 tonnes of potatoes that was used in Gwent over that period of time, which is a 12-month period. But we go further than that, because as I mentioned earlier, the public sector buy-in model is to go and procure at tier one. I won't mention a company, but there's lots of food distributions. They were one of them. And they supply, on top of those potatoes, chip and potato products. So the question could be, could any of these potato providers here, or farms, also provide the potatoes for those products, the chips, the diced potatoes? So you get added value then. And then we can look at whether we can grow the current demand situation within Wales subject to the land being accessible. So we go a little bit deeper. We got other examples here. We've got another example on apples. And there are some small dots there, some big ones around the Monmouthshire area. Hectares of apples are grown in Wales. And we continued this for not just apples and potatoes, but we looked at, cheese, parsnips, oats, wheat, asparagus, barley, chickens, cows, eggs, etc. And that data does exist. So same principle here. Where are we growing apples in Wales? There. And we can pinpoint them. When you look in the system and hover over one of those triangles, it gives you the address and postcode of that farm. And you can go down and have conversations on capacity and refer them to one of the distributors to start supplying into your public sector hospitals and schools. So 33 tonnes of apples were produced, but there again, the box on the right are the apples that are used in the public sector, but not used from the farms that we have highlighted. And so the conversation needs to be had, whether they want to use or whether they can supply those into the distributor or not. And it's a clear picture that, as Des set out earlier on, you know, when you ask the question, do we have the data? Yes. Is it shared appropriately? No, it isn't. We know that some agencies within Gov have this information and other information on other projects that we worked on as well, but recently requested a release of that data to help another project in the same category in another side of Wales, and the answer was no. So there isn't a blunt way of putting it, a grown-up approach to sharing data across service that provides food, such as the canteens in schools or hospitals. So they have a relationship, and there's a demand for certain products, and so the procurement model in Wales that so far in the public sector and private sector is that they go out and procure a tier 1 distributor. Now, the tier 1 distributor then buys all of the core products, such as the apples and the cheese and the ducks and the eggs and everything else that comes through what you call a tiering system. Suppliers lower down in the supply contract, such as they call tier 2, tier 3 and tier 4. And in our opinion, if you really want some excellent results, that needs to be disrupted a little bit. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that the tier 1 distributor doesn't do their job right. The question is, as you saw on the objectives, is the contract right and written as such that they have to consider this? So that needs to be evaluated. And so we get to a different position. If we get the data right, you still have the customer and the procurement department, but you've gone through the data analysis now and you're looking at the data and you're saying, we need to do this a little bit different. And therefore you could get different results in your supply chain that you may consider. And we do this, and we have done it on numerous occasions, whether it's food, whether it's timber, whether it's a supply chain for installation of solar panels. The procurement could go directly to those producers, but still have a tier 1 distributor that would provide a distribution service as opposed to a food management delivery service. But you would write a contract such that if you were to keep the tier 1, then the contract between the procurement, the distributor and the producers becomes one triad of objectives that are designed to meet government policy, which are these here: resilience, carbon commitment, ethics and employment, and economics. And value has to be considered, not price, because if you're just concentrating on price, you would just drive in products to the lowest cost of production. And look what happened when we hit the pandemic with the PPE. That just says a lot for that. So it can only be done if the data exists. It does. If it's an important objective, it is. And then if the opportunity is big or small enough, because some cases the farms may not be up to capacity, so you can't overwhelm them. You've got to nurture them and grow them and work with them, but still include them, but give them a percentage of the supply instead of the whole supply, which would unduly pressurize them. And then if you've got the resources that lay within the organisation department to make that happen from a strategic perspective. And that, from me, is a very short, sharp, whistle-stop tour of how you deliver real objectives through data analysis and supply chain management. And for me, that's all I have to say on that subject. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Simon. Fantastic. Quite complex. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions shortly. If you could just come out of your presentation now so I can go back into the overall one, that would be fantastic.
Thank you.
Now this is where we get very complicated, and hopefully we can get back into that now. So,
and I stopped sharing.
Right, hang on a second. This is the technical stuff coming up again. Am I back in now, guys?
No.
Simon,
Share
can you
your
just
screen
pop...
again, Des?
Sorry?
Just need to reshare your screen.
Right, bear with me. Bear with me. Oh, technical issues again. Simon, can you just pop yours back up, please? I'm having problems with that sharing button, which we had earlier on. So if you put yours back up, I can go from there.
Bear with me. Between us, we will do it.
We will.
We will do it. I've got your slides as well, Des. So if it doesn't work from Simon's, I can do it.
Thank you.
Yeah, if you would.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you do
only
that.
Only to speed it up to see me looking. I've got about 20 things open on my screen.
For some reason I can't. Oh, thank you, Jill. I obviously won't be able to drive that now, but if we go down to the last of Simon's slides, and if we go into can I take control from there, I wonder?
I don't think so, because it's like me presenting. You'll just have to do the next slide.
That's okay,
please.
that's fine. Just go down to the Simon's last slide of the next one. I think it's that, yeah. So yeah, so Simon's just given us a really good overview of the reasons why and how we can use information to actually influence that supply chain, and that's totally necessary. There are obviously other factors that need to be considered in that, and we'll come to those, and I'm sure we'll meet those on the questions and answers. Jill, if you could go to the next slide, that would be fantastic. Thank you. Just split it out, that would be lovely, because what I put in here was, Jill mentioned right at the beginning that I actually did participate in one of the cake courses last year, and the guys in the room will be familiar with this by now. Even if you haven't gone through the whole process yet, you will certainly have started that process. These tools, these are the tools that are being given to you through the course. You know, that identifying the actual project or problem that you want to develop, and then come to some sort of solution. Solutions, as I said earlier on, are depending on your organizational values, your organizational objectives, your individual thoughts, your individual input into certain things. And in the case that we did in our cohort, which was with Sam Evans from RCT, Tom Marshall from Dual Cymru, as he was then, he's moved on since then, and Alison Starling from Link Cymru. They were our cohort, and we were looking at how could we support others the opportunity to grow, to grow produce and foods. Whatever the subject is. So if you go on to the next slide, if you wouldn't mind, Jill, thank you. So I want to talk about what conclusion we came to in our particular cohort. And I'm using this as an example. Simon's just given us a really good example of how we used information, about the necessity of having that in one place, about being able to feed into it so we can share that information. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We're not parochial about regional stuff. Development, in my opinion, food development, and it is an opinion, obviously, is that food doesn't have any boundaries. And throughout all my career within the sustainable food development, that has been my mantra. And the reason I mentioned Gloucester earlier on is quite often in Wales, we tend to look inward, and we need to look right around us. I actually worked on a 10-country project some time ago, which looked at sustainable food development and how we got the public sector plate to utilise local produce. Now, all of that information, as Simon's just said, is there. In particular, for those that were looking for information on where is the ground, where is the access to land, where are the and if you go to the next slide, please, Jill. That's okay, if you can, when you can. So this is the first page of system, and these are just examples of some of the things we thought would be useful. I've just talked about the space to grow itself. We looked at whether it should be regional, national, international, or whatever it might be. And we looked at it as a repository. So it wouldn't need somebody to, you know, run the whole thing. It would be very much a depository place for people to put information. So, and again, if you go on, please, Jill. And what we were thinking there was that would stop that sort of situation where you have to have one administrator doing an awful lot of work and not really understanding some of the information that was going in. So really it was activity which would allow organisations to link to their websites, for example. So it's somewhere that we would know what we're missing, I think, in many ways. In the first example that Simon and I just gave about the food producers, the land, etc. There are many organisations with information, but no repository, nor one repository, and it's the same for, in this case, the veg patch. So it's an iteration, if you like. It's a visual of what it could be. We are hoping that we can take this out to other organisations and start working partnerships, developing partnerships, finding out who wants to be involved, for example, and using it as a leverage to start bringing that information in. Because, and it's not taken away from any of the other organisations. And if I just touch on some, I know Our Food in Abergavenny, fantastic. They're looking at developing a website. Great stuff going on over there. We're looking at the value of land, for example. We've been looking at, or Soil Association have been looking at. I haven't been looking at it. And how you value land, for example. How you offer that economic link to the value, which Simon again mentioned. It's not about money in per se, but the value of that land, that sustainable value of the land, and how you measure that against other things. There's a lot of mapping going on with Data Wales, with Welsh Government, for example. And also one of the other things with Aberystwyth University, which I'll just touch on. I know we've got some academia in the room. Some fantastic stuff with Aberystwyth and Living Wales, which is looking at how we look at climate change in the future. So it's an historical look back. It's a mapping of the land as we've got it now, and it's a prediction then of what it would look like in the future if we continue in the vein that we're going, or if we make changes. So again, these are just some examples. I could give you many more, and that's not what this presentation is about today, but certainly. So I think I hope those two examples are enough to get the thoughts flowing, and your questions. I'm sure there's lots of them. We're coming up to 11:37, so I think we'll go straight into questions and answers. And of course, recognising that this is about information at the moment, so happy to share. I think, Jill, that's where we're at the minute.
Thank you, Des. Anybody in the room got any questions they want to ask Des? Let's start there before.
How much does Simon cost a day? Come to my next meeting with the local authority.
Question from the audience: How much does Simon cost per day, and would he come to one of the meetings in the local authority?
I agree with that.
Which local authority are you talking about?
Oh, Merthyr.
Merthyr.
Well, interestingly, can I just say before Simon answers that and puts his wage packet down, I actually contacted Merthyr some time ago, interestingly enough, and there was some interest, but it was a slow interest, a slow burner. And I think the interesting thing there is getting to the right people. So, Simon, off to you.
Yeah, we can have a discussion about the daily rate again. Obviously, a lot of stuff is already done, so that does reduce any new work, and so it could be just a slight advice and a tweak and you're away. But I know you got Paul Davis up there. I'm not sure if Paul is still there. Paul's a good lad. He knows me. But yeah, if you want my details, Deserie can send them on to you, or you can contact me or write them down now, simon@opusbs.uk. Send me an email and we can have a discussion about that. There's always a worry in procurement in terms of risk, etc. But there's no risk when it comes to resilience. It's the way that you specify it.
Yeah, no, and seriously, we've been working about 3 years on taking over a patch of land.
Can you hear or not?
Yes.
Yeah, can you?
And use, not wanted, fly tipping also. And after all of that time of creating films for need and all the rest, a planning advisor has come in and said we shouldn't ask for the welfare unit classroom that we wanted to put there, but basically a shed. And I just think it's selling us short, because they believe you can get through planning if you just settle for less. And I think planning needs to change. So I think what you've just done is showing all those needs for why it should change.
That's absolutely spot on. I can't. Point of what we were just been showing you, I think, is change how odds, not just internally within our own departments. Some of the information we've got within our own organisations or your own organisations are not shared. It isn't a criticism. Well, it is a criticism, of course it is. I would like to see that change, but that's the way of the world, isn't it? That's the way we work. And what we don't recognise is that sometimes some of the things that we're working on it's classic within the public sector, well, and beyond, really, isn't it? Is not recognising the value of that information for somebody else. And until you have that conversation, and again, now you can start that conversation back in Merthyr, until you have that conversation, you don't really know what other people need to know. And your example there is typical. Planning needs to change, or is it that we need to understand better the planning situation so that we can ensure that we build our project to match or to make sure they go through smoothly? It's all about information and sharing.
Yeah, you're right. It is trying to demonstrate the value of what it is you're trying to achieve from the outset and have the conversations of planning before submitting something to them.
Yes.
No other questions in the room? Reese, are there any questions in the chat? Sorry, in the chat? Or anybody else want to come in and ask a question?
Yeah, there's one from Mary there, just asking what the web address for the veg patch is.
The veg patch is sitting in Google at the minute. It's not live. As I said earlier on, what we're trying to do now is to see if there's an appetite for it, and actually, do we need to now put that out there? But I can certainly send you the link, and you can have a look and play with it if you'd like. But it isn't live yet. It's real, but it's not live.
It needs funding.
It does. It doesn't everything.
And then there's another one here from Alex Cook. He's asked, has the investment required for public sector food been modelled, e.g. the price differential to move over to localised supply and a staged approach to deliver a pilot project?
Well, hi Alex. Haven't spoken to you for a while. Yes, a good question. I think, Simon, would you like to answer that?
The answer is quite simply no. And it's like that in a few instances. We analyse the supply chain and we give them the data, and then it disappears into the black hole, and we don't hear anything back. So there may be with the Free School Meals project, where the Cardiff Capital Region have taken a strategic view and opened up areas of potential funding for supply chain innovation, etc., and that's going well. But it hasn't passed the data and the creating a level of dissatisfaction with the status quo. What happens is they use the information to develop another policy, and then that's another year down the road before anything is done. And so, it's a bit slow, but there has been in other categories that I've worked on, but in food, unfortunately, not. But progressing.
If I might add to that, if I could add to that, Alex, it's a really key point that as Simon's just said, economy is important, value is important, whatever that value is. And one of the key things that I've noticed, huge value to us across Wales and beyond. And as Simon has just said, what tends to happen then is another bid is put into some other process or processes, and it's virtually the same, but because we don't share that information, we're not able to move on. So we're reinventing the wheel, but we're also wasting money, let's be frank. So it's one of my biggest bugbears, and I know, Simon, you'd probably agree with that.
They do. I mean, in the private sector, it's identified, spotted, gap funded, delivered. And I mean delivered. We spotted a supply chain gap in steel, where it was being delivered from Russia, Belarus, China, okay, Turkey, India to London. We digitized the whole supply chain, moved it across. All the steel is now coming from Cardiff, and they built a £30 million facility to automate the was 75 million. The shift in the procurement of steel from China, from Russia, to Wales, 75 million in value. And in the foundation economy terms, in manufacturing, 10% of an output value is attributed to wages. So that's £7.5 million of the wages in Cardiff for a period of 10 months. It does have real good economic benefits. So we can calculate that with food as well. And of course, we calculated carbon scope 3 reduced emissions in the embodied carbon that's coming from transporting our steel, and also in the production of the steel as well. There's a better furnace, electric arc in Cardiff, as opposed to a blast furnace in Turkey, Russia and China. So, you know, these things can be calculated and the case put to make value the choice of delivery, but it's yet to happen with food from a strategic perspective. That's not a criticism. It could be a resource implication. But go with projects, you know. Gwent started it, finish Gwent. You know, finish Gwent. Yeah. So in answer to the question, sorry for food, but in other areas it can be done. Has been done, I should say.
Do we have any other questions, Jill?
Grace, is there anything else from you?
We've had a couple of useful links for people to refer to be dropped into the chat. I can see Gary's raised his hand there.
Hi, Gary.
Morning, both. Just unmuting. Thanks very much for the presentation. Insightful, and as we tried to do on Cake, both open and data driven. So thanks very much. Matt made a comment about open source, which I wholeheartedly agree with. Again, what we've tried to do with Cake is develop an open innovation approach. That's the whole underpinning theory, really, is that we try to create these communities of practice across organizations that then, and as you quite rightly point out, we can, as Simon's suggesting, if we adopt in Wales that open innovation approach and collaborate and share information in an open source way, as Matt's suggesting, we can realise the benefits that are of huge value both to Wales and the environment. And I just wonder if to this audience, if there are sources of funding that you're aware of within your local authorities that first can help directly with the veg patch. I know Mary, who asked the question, is working on a 10 towns initiative over in the Swansea Bay region. The Cardiff Capital Fund, I'm not sure if you fit nicely within that call, Des, but maybe somebody around the room or in true open innovation way. Is there somebody, if not in the room, that you can talk to back at your organisation that might look at a project like the Veg Patch? And I don't know if Simon or Des, you know, so that's the one challenge I suppose I'd throw out to those sat in the room and also sat listening in. But I wonder if Simon, Des, if there's a project afoot potentially, or a fund that could help start to bring together all of the food related projects that we have going on in Wales, and as you quite rightly point out, Des, across the UK.
That would be my wish for the future. We talked about right at the beginning the vision for food, and you know, I did mention there are obviously objectives, Gary. There's lots of fantastic, I haven't even touched on some of them because that's not what this presentation was about today. But certainly there's so many fantastic projects, and bringing them together. There's no one place for that discussion. There's not. there's a number of different communities of practices, organisations, etc. And I think that there's value somewhere for that discussion. I'm not quite sure how we start looking at that, but that partnership approach has got to be instigated, looked at, funded if possible. And the competition, we're in competition with each other quite often with our projects. So when we're putting in a bid in, there's a little bit of parochialism. You know, obviously we want to maintain our own organisations, we want to resource our own organisations, but we have to be altruistic as well, you know, and that would be my wish, my vision, and I'm happy to discuss this with anyone else who wants to start developing those projects and look at those particular funding pots if necessary. Our contacts are at the end of the presentation, actually, Gareth. So let's open that discussion. Let's have a look at it. We will have a look. Simon and I are already looking at various options, aren't we, Simon?
Yeah, there are lots of funding streams available. I mean, it's just been released that there's a shared prosperity fund for Wales, which replaces the European Union funding, although it is £1.1 billion less than what was received in the last package of EU funding. So 580 million across Wales, less a top slice on the Barnett formula, leaves you with about 400 million. And that's going to be regionalised, so regional incentive funds will take care of that. But what's important,
a fifth of what we used to get divided by 22.
Yeah, exactly, divided by 22. And what's strange about this SPF as well is that universities are discounted from direct access to the money, and also our third sector organisation. So it's controlled by local authorities. So you're gonna have to buddy up with them and try and get some collaboration going, you know.
On that note, though, Food for Growth, and it only covers Gwent at the moment. And just before I left the local authority to go out on my own, we were looking at Food for Growth as a pilot. It's very successful, and we were looking at regionalisation. It's not my favourite way of putting something, because I do think that food doesn't have a boundary. But that funding in Blaenau Gwent, Caerphilly, Monmouth, Torfaen, in the Gwent region, and I missed Caerphilly. There is a movement at the moment to actually bring that into line in partnership. Because what we'll find then is we go down another silo of just the region doing it. But unless we share that information on what's happening in the regions, with other organisations, and then we can build on that, then we're you know, the urgency that we need to make for this particular food opportunity is huge. We have to do it now. It reflects on everything: economy, sustainability, etc.
Yeah, and timing is quite key on this one as well. I'm not sure if Caerphilly are in the room, but they lead on food procurement for the public sector. You know, they're well on their way to advertising some of the contract opportunities that are available to the supply chains for supplying the foods. But what you don't want, again, for this iteration for the next 3 years, is a distributor with, I'm not saying that is the case, without enough control in our contract to divert them into our local producers to try and grow this economy and get some local produce into those demand streams of the public sector, you know.
Exactly. So yeah, good point there, Gary. I think on that.
Got one more question in the room. Sorry, go on, Dawn.
Simon, can I just check? In your presentation, you said no, buy now, pay later.
Yeah.
Can you hear that? Yeah,
I can, yeah. Buy now, don't pay later, you know. Yeah. Do you want me to elaborate on that particular point? Yeah, of course, yeah. So you're considering your future generations, we're making your buying decisions now. So if you're gonna procure a contract without the tight controls within that, for a tier 1 contractor to go and source from wherever they want to, that for the next 4 years will take out any development opportunities that exists for growth for our current, you know, producers. And so at this point, when you make that decision based on the data analysis that you undertake to identify who's producing what and how many and when they can produce them, let's include them in the discussions and at least write it into that contract at high level for now, even perhaps, that whoever is awarded that contract will work with us to try and improve resilience, economics, environment, and all of those important government agendas. So buying now, do not pay later by making a decision now. Let's get it right and move forward with, you know, some more resilience in 3 years' time than we have at this moment. That's what I mean by
okay. Yeah. Thank you, Simon and Des. Thank you
Thank
for interesting hour that you've both given us. I think given a lot of food for thought here, literally food for thought.
literally.
The session's been recorded, so it will go up onto the website, and we will be able to share the slides hopefully with everybody who's been part of this webinar. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And hope you're all taking things on board.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you,
I
Gary.
can see it.
Thank
Gary's
you.
just
Thank
raising his
you,
hand
guys.
there
Thank
before we
you.
finish.
Gary,
Sorry,
did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, just quickly, can I check that everyone that's commented in the chat, if they're happy for us to capture the suggestions and references they've put in, and then put that out with the presentation, because that will allow people to pick up some of the references and great links that have been provided.
And happy to answer any questions offline as well.
Likewise. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.